Okay, hello everyone and welcome to tonight's workshop. It's Karina here. Thank you so much for coming. I just want to introduce myself. I'll try briefly. So I am the founder of the Share Your Story with Confidence project community. The idea is to give voice to, I guess, unheard stories or lesser heard stories, and to build up the confidence of our community members through creative reading, creative writing, and creative thinking. A bit of background about me. I've worked in finance for 10 years, ELT for another 10, and I have just completed my master's related to teaching and technology. And my dissertation project was actually, I designed and ran an online course in creative writing in order to investigate the L2 creative writer identity. L2 meaning second language learner, or in this case, English language learner. So I'm kind of interested in identity and identities. And yeah, I would say I have multiple identities. Student, of course, teacher, blogger, writer, and in relation to this this session and what we're going to talk about, I can be regarded as Black or brown or mixed or other, all of the above. A woman, queer, working class, able-bodied. I have multiple, I guess I embody multiple identities. And thinking about that in the context of work, I was working in trading, and what is the image of a trader? And I was working in teaching, what is the image of a teacher? Despite these multiple identities, I don't always see myself or see myself in there. Anyway, so that kind of brings us to the topic of tonight's session. And before I run out of breath, I'm going to stop talking and hand over to my co-host, Ali.
Okay, hi. I think everybody should be able to hear me. Let me know if you don't. I am Ale or Alex, and I made a PowerPoint for you all tonight. I'm gonna share it in a minute. I think I might still not be the host, or am I, Karina? I wonder. Yes, I think you could share the PowerPoint now. Yeah. Okay. So there's not a lot of words in here. It's really, I hope, a light presentation with pictures and whatever, not a lot of text. The title is just like Struggles, Privileges, and Inclusive Language. Me and Karina spent a lot of time trying to figure out the title. Again, it's like such a huge, it's not even a topic. It's like talking about our experiences as human beings, really. And it's part of like this wonderful workshop that Karina organizes, this Share Story with Confidence. And I was here last time as well, and I've seen a little bit like how you're working and what you're doing. Also, yeah, I would ask you to introduce yourselves also in a little bit. You can keep your camera off or turn it on as you want. It helps me a little bit. Normally when I teach, I'm also an English teacher, and I taught high school and college in California, and soon in Scotland maybe, and now I teach English in and Italian in Berlin, and I live between here and Britain. Basically, before we do that, I guess just a couple of things. This is like, I want to just like keep in mind the main questions, that the guiding questions that me and Karina came up with, because of course, like being teachers and writers, thinking about class, gender, and race is crucial. And two guiding questions: how do issues of privilege and respect for diversity relate to ELT, English language teaching? And how do struggles and intersectional identities influence our creativity / creative writing? I hope these questions like stay with us through the workshop, although we're going to move quite far from these questions per se, but we're going to always try to get back to them, and especially at the end. And I just like, before again, ask you to introduce yourselves really quickly, just like talk a little bit just about this poster, why I chose it. You see it says, are we really all in the same boat? The original sign said, we're all in the same boat. And this is an artist from, grew up in Serbia, Marina Abramovic. And she created this poster for the Barcolana, which is the 50th edition of the Barcolana in Trieste, which is actually the city I grew up in, and in October 2018. She wanted to send a message of solidarity, really, right? So she wanted to talk about how we are all in the same boat. Sometimes we forget we're all human, right? Especially the time of big refugee waves and people crossing the Mediterranean on very precarious boats. She was really trying to make people more sensitive about it and say we're really all in the same boat, or at least we should be. The question, of course, made the far right really angry in the city. This is like newspaper title, we're all in the same boat. Marina Abramovic poster angers Italian right-wing politician, of course. Trieste Deputy Mayor Paolo Polidori calls image commission for sailing regatta political propaganda. And of course, it's a political message, right? And we can all take any image and anything I will say as well, Karina will say today, critically. So just, of course, I want to try to open a space for discussion and reflection as opposed to teaching. The first thing I wanted to say is that none of this is new, and I don't expect to teach it to you. Okay, there's some things that I've learned over 10 years of grad school, anthropology and geography, that maybe a little few tools that maybe I could offer, but in general, of course, we all know these things very, very well. Secondly, I'm aware of I have a lot of white and male privilege as well, and I speak from this position. I think one key thing about today is that I like to invite everybody just to reflect a little bit more than usual, though I think everybody, all of us, do every day, about our position and about our privileges and our struggles at the same time. Myself, I grew up as a working class kid and then raised more of a middle class kid. I'm a first generation college student, and my mom only finished middle school, so that's sort of my class background. Gender-wise, I'm non-binary or queer. I came out as gay when I was a kid, and then I realized my gender identity is a little bit more complex than that. So I use they pronouns, or he as well, because again, I recognize that no matter how I identify, I do hold a lot of privilege in that sense. When I walk down the street, I'm really tall, and so for sure, we're going to talk about these things, but I want to forefront them. And the last thing is that, of course, I also have a lot of white privilege. I grew up speaking Italian, though, and then I immigrated in the United States, and then Germany and England. So my position is, of course, one of privilege when it comes to race and racism. And on the other hand, I have a little bit of struggles when it comes to being an immigrant and, not being a native speaker of English, growing up speaking Italian first. Although now I teach it. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about that. And I guess I would just then ask you if you could just feel free to keep the video off, but maybe if you can turn your microphone on. If it's okay, I'll just just call you. Maybe that's easiest, Karina, just to really quickly know just where you are, maybe your name, how you like to be addressed, and where you are. Okay, thank you. Okay, do you maybe I can't really see the names now. I can see your face, but not your name. So maybe you with glasses. Would you mind just just saying your name and where you are right now? Or we can't quite hear you. Can you turn your microphone on?
You need to unmute yourself.
I think they're unmuted already. Maybe there's a problem with the microphone. Maybe it's a good time to check that your microphone works also, because we're going to try to
maybe
get interactive.
Sorry to interrupt you, Alan.
Yeah, I'm gonna use the mic.
I wonder if you, as host,
of course,
have the ability to unmute people. If you go to the top right corner of the image of the person and click on it, there's 3 dots.
Yeah.
Can you
saw that.
unmute them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This person was already unmuted actually, but I still couldn't hear them. I don't know why. I'm talking about you with glasses and your hair up. We can't hear you.
Hold on.
Maybe we can chat a little bit as well.
Ale, do you want to give me back host for a second?
Yes, for sure.
Let's see.
Let me see.
Let me see if I can do that. Maybe you need to stop sharing your screen. Let's see.
Now you're the host again. I'm not sure why we can hear people.
You are the host now. Yes. Right. Let me.
Yes,
see.
you are.
No, you should be unmuted.
Yes, Lati,
but it's
you
not
should be unmuted.
I'm sorry, guys. Let's hold on a second.
Shall we try maybe should somebody else try for a minute just to see? Maybe we have a list of participants in alphabetical order, more or less, actually. So that Lottie Galpin is the first one. Maybe Lottie, would you mind just saying where you are? Can you try to unmute yourself? And
it shows that she should be unmuted, but it's not working. Okay, let's try another one. Okay, how about that?
Mute me, okay?
Yes.
Hi.
Who's this?
Lorenzo.
Okay, hi. Okay, so Lorenzo can go first. Where are you right now?
Birmingham.
Birmingham. All right, nice to meet you. And what are your pronouns?
I guess she, her, just because I never thought about it.
Okay. We can talk about it later.
Jump today, let's say.
Okay, no worries. And then maybe can Josie go next? Maybe.
Hi.
Hi.
It's Josie from Minnesota.
Okay, hi.
USA.
Nice
they, them.
Okay, nice to meet you. I can't really put a face to the name because I couldn't quite see who spoke. Maybe can you wave, Josie? Oh, the camera. Josie's camera is off.
Josie does have their camera on.
No worries.
Now the camera is on and.
Okay. This is a good time to test. It's okay. Whatever. We can't use the time as we planned. We already knew that. It's fine. And maybe Evie, if I'm saying the name right, can you say hi? Hi.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
My name's Evie, and I use the pronouns she, her, and I'm calling from Milan in Italy. I'm British.
Okay. Hi. Perfect. Nice to meet you. Good. Milan. That's where actually I met Lorenza, and I met Karina in Beijing instead. And Samantha, maybe.
Hi. Yeah. Call me Sam. I'm in Peterborough in the UK, and I go by she and her.
Okay. Great. Nice to meet you. Perfect. And Balsam, if I'm saying the name right. Again, apologize if I don't.
Yes, it's right. Hello.
Okay. Hi.
Hello, Ali. Hello, Karina.
Hi.
I'm an Egyptian, but I work here in Saudi Arabia.
Okay. So are you
English teacher also?
Okay. Are you in Saudi Arabia right now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Where in Saudi Arabia?
In Riyadh, the capital.
Riyadh. I'm learning Arabic right now, trying. But hard after Chinese. Nice to meet you. And then
nice to meet you too.
Nice to meet you too. So Bassem, and then Carol Tabor, if that's right.
Hi.
Okay.
Oh.
Hi.
My videos. Oh, hang on. My video is going to work. My video. Sorry, my video is not working.
It's okay. It's gonna work maybe in a
bit.
bit.
I'm here.
Yes,
hi.
It is. Okay. Hi. How are you?
Hi. I'm fine. I'm in Yorkshire in England.
Okay.
Sorry, I've forgotten what else I'm supposed.
It's okay. Maybe some people were sharing what pronouns they use.
Oh, okay. She, her.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Nice to meet you. Thank you. And I used to live in Brighton actually last year, and now I'm gonna move up north, but not maybe Scotland. Let's see. I want to see if maybe I'm missing somebody. Lottie, maybe you didn't get to speak before, did you? Could you try now, maybe?
Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, I can.
Hey, yeah, you. Okay, so I'm Lottie. I live in the southeast of England, in Kent.
Okay.
Ashford, you go through it if you get the train to France, but you don't get off because it's a bit rubbish.
No, you won't get off.
Yeah, I use she, her. And yeah, I work as an editor in ELT, sometimes writing, but mostly editing.
Okay, nice. Nice
And
to
I'm
meet
thinking of moving to Scotland as well.
you. Nice. Maybe see you there. I don't know. I've been to Kent, I think only once, aside from like taking the train across it, to actually see the statue of Pocahontas. I think that's
Oh,
in
okay.
Kent. Yeah. So we're gonna talk a
Okay.
little bit about those things as well today, of complex colonialism is
Okay.
anyway. Yeah, cool. Nice to meet you. And maybe
Nice to meet you.
nice to meet you. I think Trey, it might be the last person. Is that right?
Hi.
Hi. Oh no, Christopher as well. Trey, I can't see you, I think. Yes, I see a frog. Is that a frog? Iguana.
Well, that's
Okay,
my
hi, Trey. No, I
pet
see you.
bearded dragon. Hi, I'm Trey. I
Okay.
go by he, him, and I'm calling from Ohio in the United States.
Okay, cool. Hi, nice to meet you. I spent half my life in California, and
Oh, cool.
yeah, now I'm back in Europe, and yeah, maybe it was good timing because of COVID, unfortunately, but I really meant it. Cool. Nice to meet you.
Nice
I always
to
try,
meet you.
sorry, I keep on saying, I always have to feel like I have to respond to people and say a little bit of, like, sorry. And then I think Christopher Mack, maybe? Hi.
Mackey. I'm Christopher Mackey. I'm calling in from Cincinnati, Ohio. Nice to see you all today.
Okay, nice to meet you. Perfect. And did we miss somebody? Samantha, did you speak? Yes, I think so. I don't, maybe not.
Yeah, there was just
Yes,
one
you
more
did.
name I see, which is Eli, maybe?
Eli, I'm trying to look at the list.
Maybe you
Yeah.
can.
Hello.
Yes, hi. Okay, hi.
Hi. I'm
How's it going?
Eli Hinkson. I'm also from Ohio. And I identify as he, him.
Okay, perfect. And I guess, are you friends? Do you know each other? You Ohioans or?
Me, Christopher, and Trey are all in the same college class.
Okay, nice. Okay, perfect. Nice. Okay, wonderful. And now I have an interview to teach in college again in Southampton. We'll see how that goes. But for now, I've been teaching high school and languages. And anyway, it's nice to meet you all. I think that was everybody. Maybe if not, you just write in the chat. We can use the chat a little bit as well. You have it. You have the 3 dots, and you can. I mean, many people are already writing, so I'm just gonna write hey, and then we can begin. So of course yes, I think Karina, you were also gonna say a little bit about the other workshop, maybe if you want, just because like of course these issues are really important in general, and you just recently went to another workshop.
Yeah,
it, right?
but just before I speak about that, are you host again? Are you able to control everything?
I mean, as long as people can see my PowerPoint, I don't need to control anything else.
I know, but yeah, I was just worried about people being able to speak, and me, I was like manually unmuting. But anyway, we'll just get to that later.
Okay.
No, whether you're talking about being in the same boat or not being in the same boat, that kind of reminded me of a webinar that I attended yesterday. The audience was ELT, like publishing professionals, and it was talking about, what diversity and inclusion is, the lack of diversity and inclusion, I guess, in British publishing, and what these publishers were planning to do to kind of improve things. And so I thought that was like a really useful kind of template, essentially recognizing this lack of knowledge and calling in someone like an expert for guidance. So they had like a consultant there, and making a plan with strict deadlines. So like I thought that was a really good kind of template as a plan of action. And the other thing that stood out was the kind of useful terminology, the useful kind of vocabulary used under, that kind of sits under diversity and inclusion. Things like tokenism kind of came up, intersectionality. And I think that is, yeah, it's very, very useful. I feel that the vocabulary, gives us a way to start a conversation and to have, to speak in a more nuanced way about these big issues. So that's what I took away from that. Maybe some people here attended, but I thought that was it was like a deep dive into D&I, but at the same time it was quite short. So yeah, it was just a taster. Anyway, so yeah, I think that, vocabulary, language, terminology is so useful in, starting a conversation. I guess that's what, what I wanted to say.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And also today we really don't have a lot of time. We do have 1 hour and 10 minutes. And this is literally like basically 2 semesters of like introduction to anthropology. And like it's really difficult to talk about all this during this time, of course. But I'll try, okay? And Karina will try. I think it is really about tools and about, offering a space to think about these things again. And then, yeah, again, just to think also about our struggles and privileges and how they come up in our roles as teachers and writers, which of course, especially as teachers, we do have a lot of power, right? We do have a lot of power in terms of speaking, setting the agenda, creating, a learning environment that actually supports everybody in the room and helps them learn, right? So I do think that being aware of our privileges and other people's struggles is sort of like a useful, it is like really crucial to be, I think, a good teacher. I try to step back a lot, but it's kind of difficult today because I am the speaker. But again, let's see how that goes. So anyway, I think a little bit, this is like, me and Karina were talking about this, this meme. It's been like going around the internet for years now, and there's like a bunch of different versions. Of course, we're not all in the same boat, at least not yet, right? So there's a lot of inequality, of course, and that's artificial as well, right? It's structural in a sense that those structures have been created by people, often not by us, right? So we find ourselves in different positions in the world, in positions of power and access. So obviously we're not all in the same boat now. And then of course, we can think about equality and how, everybody getting a little bump could maybe help everybody, but then some people are already in a higher position, right? So obviously, as this meme goes, then equity will be different from equality in the sense of actually, helping more those who need it more, right? So it can be called also affirmative action in terms of, for example, college admissions, etc. And then you see, of course, a lot of reaction from, people on the far right normally being defending their privilege and being like, well, what about me, right? But you normally actually were already privileged to begin with. And that's sort of the issue. That's sort of the inequality, how it comes in everyday life, from college to the workplace, etc. So we are striving for equity as opposed to just equality. And then, of course, there's a lot of reactionary movements against that. And in the last 4 years, between Brexit, Trump, Modi in India, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Salvini, Orban, I mean, literally almost everywhere, we have been, these issues have really come to the fore. One of the reactions here is, this is actually a right-wing meme that I found, is sort of trespassing, people it's not about equality or equity or trespassing, buy a ticket like everyone else had to. Anyway, that is sort of the, some reactions to this meme. And then you have, of course, capitalism. You do have some people who have more power or have more capital, and then, pay your tickets, freeloaders, right? So the idea is they don't even want to listen about equity or equality. The main thing for them is that these people are watching the game for free. So the whole idea here is that reality is actually looks more like this, right? Some people, and when it comes to, for example, race and racism, I'm obviously up there, right? If I go to a bank, I'm going to get a loan in a way that is going to be much easier. It's going to be much easier for me to access a loan just, in an interview with a banker than somebody like Karina, for example. Of course, we're not all the same. We all have different power. We hold different positionalities and have different power in different contexts. So reality looks more like that, right? We talked already about equality, equity, and then liberation would be, of course, no wall whatsoever. We all have access to, the game. And that's sort of what I guess, we'll be striving to in order, to be all in the same boat. And so I guess the first thing was really about class, and something that we don't actually talk about as much. And I think that in the last few years, issues of gender identity and race and racism have have been discussed more and more. I think class used to be more of a common conversation about class, which used to be way more common back in the 60s or 70s, and then neoliberalism, you know, free market reforms made us think that we're all actually free individuals. We can, you know, we can all achieve success, whatever that means. And issues of class have become less and less important. But of course, if you are, a friend of mine actually was telling me this the other day. You are, they were actually in a classroom at SOAS, right, School of Oriental and African Studies in London, and you know, there were 20 different people, many different ethnicities and backgrounds. People were discussing their problems with different gender identities, being a woman, being queer, being gay, being lesbian, etc. But then some of them were actually the princess of Bahrain, for example. I mean, of course, class matters as well, right? And the issue is that, of course, they matter all together at the same time, right? How much money you have does matter, for sure. Just a really quick thing. Of course, this is again nothing new. Masters and servants always been there in almost all societies, everywhere, and then we know that, you know, with imperialism and colonization by white Europeans, mostly also Japanese later, there's been like an explosion of like, you know, the inequalities that in capitalism in Europe were already developing. Here you have Chinese workers building railways in the US here, and you have colonialism in Equatorial Africa, French Central Equatorial Africa. So of course you see how already, you know, they were already all together. Race, gender, and class have always been all together. And today, this is another meme. This guy looks like Murdoch. I have no idea what that is, but careful mate, that foreigner wants your cookie, right? The idea is that, of course, this guy in a suit already has 75,000 cookies on the plate, and then, you know, trying to pit people one against the other, right? And that's sort of the idea. There's, of course, different ways in which we participate in the economy, controllers of big capital, like Murdoch or, you know, Bezos and etc. Small business owners will still be middle class, but also upper middle class, managerial class, workers, of course. And most people in the world are workers. You can think of employed workers, unemployed workers, precariously employed workers, migrant workers, and modern slavery as well. So a lot of different positions over there. Last thing, of course, there's been a lot of reaction against that as well in the last few years from the left. You see, of course, Blair in the US and AOC, and then the environmental consequences of capitalism have been clear to most people. You have Occupy 2012, kill capitalism before it kills the planet, the ocean is rising and we are too. And then finally, just of course, I love this image of Elon Musk. People like him would think of rather going to Mars than actually changing things on Earth, right? So you see the crazy inequality we live in today, and we still feel we're in the same boat. Well, again, let's think about it for a second. Again, a lot of issues about race, disability, nationality, gender identity, sexual orientation, class is actually often forgotten today, right? Whereas it used to be the main category in terms of identity back in the 60s and 70s, whereas race and gender were barely considered. Now, race and gender are much more considered, and class is not considered as much. But I do think we should. This is a much more complete spectrum of like privileges and oppression. We can't look at all of them, but again, maybe just really quickly, you see being male and masculine, male, white, European, having European heritage, heterosexual, able-bodied, credentialed, educated, young, attractive, upper and upper middle class, Anglophone, light, pale, gentle, non-Jew, fertile. Those would definitely be, you know, offer more privilege than being gender deviant, female, people of color, non-European origin, LGBTQ, person with disability, non-literate, old, unattractive, working class, poor, English as a second language, dark, Jew, infertile. This is a much more complete spectrum, right? And of course, we can all think already for a second about, you know, what kind of power we hold in the society. And of course, they're all related, because of course, who is attractive? Normally somebody who looks more like Brad Pitt, right? Than another kind of man, for example. And of course, race comes in that situation as well. Okay, so in terms of just like thinking about it for a second, and then giving the floor to Karina, this was sort of like the issue I thought about Kim Kardashian and the rise of private firefighting. don't know if you saw this, 2018, fighters in Los Angeles, Kim Kardashian's private firefighters expose Americans' fault lines. Rich people don't get their own better firefighters, or at least they aren't supposed to. So Kim Kardashian and Kanye West actually hired private firefighters during the LA fires in 2018. The issue of class, of course, is like so clear, right? They could afford to actually pay their own firefighters to protect their mansion, while at the same time, poorer people in LA were burning alive. So I mean, of course, in a situation that is not comparable to a big fire in a place like Pakistan or whatever, but in that context, they protected themselves because they could afford to. The question is, do we think enough about class? Do we think enough about oppositionality? How does that come up in a classroom or when we write, right? Karina, did you wanna jump in just to think about this before we open the floor a little bit?
So shall I talk about my struggles or privilege in relation to class? Okay. Well, I was, I'm from a single parent household, and we grew up on benefits. And I guess that can be contrasted with the fact that I had a private school education. And what else can I say? And then later had a fairly good paying job, as a result of that. Before moving into ELT, and I had a less well-paying job. Yeah, I guess those are the kind of the first things that kind of come to mind in terms of my. Does that put me in the working class? I think so.
Yeah, I guess that changes, right? I guess your position in the economy and your privilege in terms of class definitely changes. And I think that for me has been quite similar. My father's family owned a fish shop, and my mom's family were was a fisherman. My grandfather, he fished with his hands in Yugoslavia. My first job was working in the fish shop, so it's like fish all summer. But then, I sort of was like, I jumped completely by, getting into a PhD at Berkeley and then teaching college. And so my mom finished middle school, and then, then now, of course, I chose teaching over academia, and that I think puts us both in a sort of like maybe upper working class situation. I don't know. I guess like if you didn't want to add anything, Karina, I think like you were maybe later. I don't know. You had different things in mind, but I was sort of offering.
I can talk about more struggles and more privileges, but I don't know if shall we open it up to?
Yeah. I think the issue here was really to think about it for a second, each one of us, and the question about sharing your story about inequality in terms of access to resources, and the first question is, do we talk about it enough, right? Are we really all in the same boat? That's, I guess, second question to think about a second. And then how do these issues come up in your teaching or in your writing, right? So I guess what me, Karina, thought maybe is just to maybe answer really the question. If you can, please mention one struggle and one privilege from your personal experience and position, maybe basically like we did really quickly. And then maybe we can open it up for comments about specifically more about class. If that's okay, Karina, then maybe we can try. I don't know if you want to maybe call on people. I feel like you.
What we could do is, I know that there's a reaction button at the bottom. If you want to speak, maybe you can click on that. Then I can unmute you if you're not able to unmute yourself, or you can just type in the chat, and I can also unmute.
Yeah. So the main idea would just be to like answer the D question, right? Just like to mention one struggle and one privilege we hold, and then the other three questions we can think about it together after that. But maybe just checking in about it if we each can. Of course, if you want, you don't have to, right? But it's just nice to. So Karina, are you with?
Sorry, Lottie, you are unmuted.
Yeah, okay, sorry, I didn't know that meant speak, sorry. Yeah, no, I'm happy to go first. So struggle. So class is one of my things as well. So I come from a working class background. And for me, I went to university, but I was the first in my family to go to university. And I think for me, I still feel very uncomfortable in what I perceive as middle class situations. So, and at school, my friends were sort of slightly better off than me. So that was always kind of, I always thought of it as having a chip on my shoulder. And recently I've kind of realized it's like a teeny weeny bit of very privileged trauma, but you know, I still don't really feel comfortable in middle class situations. It took me a long time to feel comfortable to go out to eat in restaurants. And it sounds crazy, but posh situations make me uncomfortable and posh people make me a bit uncomfortable.
Right.
Not that there's anything wrong with them, it's totally mine, but that's definitely a struggle for me. And privilege, obviously, you know, I'm white, I'm now...
We're going to talk about those other things later. Yeah, I was just focusing on class for like 20 seconds. Just that was great. Yeah, thank you. Then we'll have a whole other section about gender and race. I hope we can get to it. Thank you, Larry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, a similar experience or similar thoughts, kind of going to university, having a little, I guess there's a little bit of privilege there. First of all, the private school education at secondary school, I had an assisted place. And then at university, I was actually in the last year for a free grant. I'm showing my age. Yeah, so there is that privilege there, a little bit of privilege there. And I recall my sister, a few years after me, she kind of ended up with 3 times more debt than I. So it's kind of like, you know, a good thing and a bad thing, kind of all tied into one.
Listening to Lottie's story about her upbringing, that rings true for me in a lot of ways. Working class, my dad was in the army, then you know, went from job to job. My mum didn't work, she raised us. And I remember a contrast between the Christmases when my dad was still in the army of having just way too many gifts, and then after he came out of the army and obviously the income dropped significantly, of just that, you know, it never being like that again, and it was going, we can't afford it, we can't afford it, we can't afford it. And but then again, I was the first one in my family to go to university, but still now I'm a freelancer, you know, and I work from home. I make my own hours, I choose my own work. But even now that I have occasionally sort of the imposter syndrome of like, but that's not a proper job. A proper job is you go for an interview, you beg and scrape and say, please give me the job. And then they give you the job and you're lucky to have it and you don't ask for anything else. And that's what you do for the rest of your life. So being free to do, you know, be my own boss is actually what's come out of it. And now, you know, I'm in a position finally where I might be able to buy my own house. Well, I will be buying my own house, and you know, maybe in a position to save up to do a master's later, and you know, have more education. So yeah, I privileged in many ways, but I think more so now than my upbringing.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much. I know that Josie would like to speak, and I think is unmiked or mic'd.
Yep. So I grew up, my father was the first person in his family, or of the children in his family, to go to school, and he became a lawyer. So we had this long period where there was no money and there was no dental insurance. And I would say in the States, having excellent teeth is just like a thing. So having grown up with no money and no access to dental care, you know, everybody in my family has just horrible teeth, missing teeth, and that's a thing I'm very conscious of, because I do think, maybe other people can speak, in the States, it's like, yeah, missing teeth is a sign of white trash or drugs, or somehow it makes your appearance less than. So still have that. So that's why I like to have my camera off, maybe, now that I'm saying that.
Of course, no worries. Can you think also of a privilege in that sense, in terms of class, in terms of having some level of, you know, some struggles and some privilege?
Are you asking me?
Yeah. Just to think about both sides. I really heard you about.
Oh yeah.
By the way, about.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm speaking from my own experience about how I feel, and that perception that others have of, here's a person who didn't take care of themselves, or in some ways. So I think, but also that access in the States to good dental care, if you are on assistance, is, I mean, it's notoriously horrible.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, if you feel like you hold some kind of privilege compared to other people in the world, you know, in terms of like class.
Oh, what privilege do I hold?
Yeah.
Oh.
Think of both.
Well, so after my father, you know, became a lawyer, things moved, you know, our financial situation changed and things. And I think I grew up a family of wild children, but we got away with a lot because we were white from a wealthy suburb. And that privilege, I mean, took a while to recognize, but it's there.
Thanks.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so the class thing is really interesting for me because, well, it shaped my biography, but also shapes what I do, because I do research on inequality, and I definitely have a history of upward mobility. Al and I actually met in a very upper class environment, which is Bocconi University, a private university, which I was able to attend through a scholarship like Karina. And I never talk about class when I met Ale, because it was a very upper class environment, and I was a stranger in paradise, living in the, you know, the accommodation of people with low income, and having crooked teeth that I only was able to fix, you know, a couple of years ago. And fundamentally, you know, really, you know, I come from the south of Italy, in a place where there was no jobs. Both of my parents were unemployed for a long time, and my dad being disabled 90%, so living off disability benefits. But on the other side, I had lots of cultural capital not coming from my parents having studied, because my dad didn't even go to high school, but coming from my parents just being curious people and having books, and my dad being an anarchist. So I recognized that I had a lot of that culture capital coming from just having books. And we had this thing in my school that I think was passing by the underprivileged schools, that we had a bus with books where you could rent books. I think it was a model that in the 90s was used to, like, you know, bring kids into reading books, and it worked pretty well. But then, you know, having done the upward mobility, I always felt a stranger in, you know, like a stranger in paradise. There's a whole literature on like how people feel it. But I also find that this working class thing can be quite tricky, because it's confusing the cultural, which is, I've actually written about it, because in Brexit it was used against people of color or EU migrants. To become a very divisive concept, because if you don't have the same cultural experience of my British working class experience, then you're not working class. And it was very divisive, and there was like an assumption that the Europeans were all middle class, and that, you know, so there was a very interesting discussion. And most of the people in the UK identify as middle class, as working class, even though they're middle class. So we've done actually studies on this. Most of the people identify as working class. People have a cultural attachment to the notion of being working class, and also depends on the generations, because to say I'm a first generation student now and to say it 40 years ago means completely different things, because I
Absolutely.
founded in the 60s. So I'm just being devil's advocate, but just because I'm passionate about understanding inequality, and I think that the problem of people from low income is very important, but it's also important the difference between the culture and the
Yeah,
social
absolutely.
dynamic.
Yeah, I was thinking. Me and Karina were thinking a little bit about these issues as well, and it's very, of course, it's kind of impossible to separate, of course, class from race, from gender. They're all, of course, constantly intertwined, right? I mean, you talk about, for example, cultural capital, for instance, and somebody being, from a poorer family, for example, but having a lot of books in their house, maybe being more educated, that's also part, of course, of like, in this sense, class privilege and education. There's sort of one issue, because me and Karina were talking about that before the workshop, and we do need to finish at 9, and we do have to cover a lot, right? We were thinking of keeping comments, just doing a quick round of literally mentioning one word, so that we could actually all speak and just say, like, I had this privilege and this struggle. But of course, like, it is extremely important to explain, right, where we come from. It's impossible. We realize now that it is impossible to just say it without some more context. So I guess I don't want to cut anybody short, and especially if somebody wanted to mention something. If you have a quick comment, maybe we can move on to gender in 2 minutes. And if somebody just wants to quickly mention how they think about themselves in terms of class and why that matters, whether we talk about it enough, because clearly we don't, right? If you want, just maybe unmute yourself and just comment quickly, maybe half a minute if you can. If you want. Otherwise we can move on. It's up to you. I think that the model of like everybody speaking, we might try it again later, Karina, right, for gender, maybe, so each person can chip in for like half a minute, and then we can open it up, right? Yeah, let's keep this in mind. Then, of course, we can speak you can speak at different times, right? And so maybe you can also come back to class in a bit. And then the next thing would really be about, yes, of course, like gender. And I sort of went back to this sort of like, this image of Elon Musk, I really like it. And this sort of, because it really shows that it's just like thinking about Mars, doesn't really care about what's going on Earth. In this sentence, right? First man on the moon says, one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. There's, I guess we can all see the problem in that sentence. There's like the word man coming up 3 times. What does that actually mean? It was 1969, of course, different times, but really the problems remain, of course, for most people who are not, well, in this case, Elon Musk, right? And there's one article that I just like found, which was like Meet the Women Who Masterminded Moon Landings. 50 years since the moon landing, Good Housekeeping. Karina talked about this magazine. We don't really know much about it, but this article was interesting. Meets the women who helped make history. And it says here, I think this is interesting, over here, when Joanne Morgan worked at NASA in the 60s, she often had to work in buildings with no women's toilets. It's 1969. Fed up with running back and forth, she pioneered unisex loos. And this sort of like, of course, right now we're talking about, all gender bathrooms and all these issues. Of course, it was already an issue back then. I guess I was more like second wave feminism and issues about, of course, like, in Italy, for example, divorce became legal. And we have, struggles for abortion right now still ongoing in Poland. So, of course, being a woman has not gotten much easier compared to that time. And then a lot of other issues came up linked to, of course, relationship with like men, right? So of course we have with all these letters right now, there's so many LGBTQIAAP. Okay, we don't have to look at all of them, but we know, well, you can just read through them: lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, transsexual, yes, different things, queer, questioning, intersex, ally, asexual, pansexual. there's more, by the way, and of course the explosion of like, you know, gender diversity as well, aside from sexuality diversity, has of course affected the struggle against the patriarchy, or the system in which of course men have more power than all all others, women and all others. This is sort of the issue, and the issue in like third and fourth wave feminism in the 90s and then today is really about trans feminism as well. Trans women are women. Intersectional feminism is this question of intersectionality and considering different struggles at the same time. What does it mean to be trans and a woman? What does it mean to be black and a woman? What does it mean to be disabled and a woman? And so this issue, of course, I think you've heard of like possibly the question of like the Harry Potter author, J.K. Rowling. She was like making comments in a not really including trans people in a feminist vision, right? So it is an open question. There's a lot of work to be done, obviously, in this direction. The extra thing that including here is this sort of non-binary gender identity being neither a man or a woman, and that's sort of like how I've always felt. I've always felt like that growing up. I never felt I was a man, even when I came out as gay. I never felt I was a gay man, and I never felt I never felt I belonged in a gay male circle. I never really had gay male friends, and I also don't feel like a woman. So in the last 4 or 5 years, I started more and more identifying as non-binary. So the pronouns people use, of course, have like also exploded in different languages. So they is like a common one in English. There's like so many different languages, and even in Arabic, I'm not in Arabic, I'm struggling with that, because when you say you are in Arabic, you already have to gender that. You have to say anti for a man and anta for a woman. Sorry, anta for a man and anti for a woman. There's not even a way to say you are, you know, picking one or the other gender in this binary version of gender. Of course, you can be more than that. And the question here was really, yes, just really about gender-based inequalities, privileges, and struggles beyond man as a muscle universe. And how do we actually think about that? How do we think about that in the classroom? How do we think about that when we write? And then also, yeah, there's a question of vocabulary, as Karina was mentioning before. I'll get back to that in a second. But Karina, did you want to maybe add something to the question of gender, also because, of course, being a woman is a whole different experience than mine as a non-binary person, obviously.
Thinking about being a woman, I guess what comes to mind, or what story I want to share, is maybe related to my work ethic. I would say that I work very hard, very professional, like the minimal Karina standard is very, very high. And now I am like questioning my kind of obsession or like incessant need to overperform, basically, to the point of getting like stressed or even like feeling sick. And I'm just trying to unpack it and understand this kind of behavior. And I'm thinking it's because I feel judged, I guess, if everything that I do like isn't perfect. And I'm just trying to understand that. Is it something to do with gender? Is it something to do with race? I just feel that there's like this invisible pressure to be better than the rest, just to be accepted as, okay or normal. So that's just something that's on my mind, that I'm trying to kind of work through right now.
Yeah, totally. And I think also in this sense, for each of us to think of like, privileges and struggles we have, right, in this context, is that for me, of course, even at Berkeley, in a university like that where Judith Butler teaches, you have my professors giving me the cold shoulder all the time, because I was like the queer student, and they actually, of course, were super macho with most female students, talking to them really closely, and then hitting on them, it's disgusting. And then I, of course, wasn't even considered, whereas they were exchanging whiskey bottles with some male students. That's literally some, some gender dynamics. So in that sense, of course, yes, I did have problems, but on the other hand, I do still hold a lot of male privilege. And so if you don't know me, if you don't talk to me, if you don't know where I come from and how I live my life, again, the bank test, you know, if I go to a bank, I will get a loan, and, you know, it's going to be easier for me to access it than somebody like me who is a woman or visibly trans, etc. Right? And I think so. We were thinking about this question, Karina, just to give you 5 minutes, maybe, yeah, and maybe 4 until 9:30, maybe, Karina, just to think about this thing. So first of all, what are your pronouns? So of course, I do believe it's something that we should get used to asking when we ask people's names, so that we already know how to address them. And then second, find the struggle and the privilege you have in your position. We always have both, I think, in some ways, almost always, but not always. And then to see, she said, to see, can you think of a sentence or expression that you would change in a more inclusive direction? So for me, it was this thing about man on the moon. It was sort of like, you know, one step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. I would change as saying first person on the moon says one small step for a person, one giant leap for humankind. I mean, that's obviously a whole different sentence if you say it like that, right? So maybe we were just thinking, Karina, right, to maybe just like take a break for a few minutes and give people a chance to think about this for a minute, and maybe find an example, I guess in English if you can, but it doesn't have to be in English, right, Karina? If you find another language and you can explain what it means, and then we can quickly go around the circle, and by 9:40 we get to race, hopefully. What do you think? Yeah,
that sounds good.
8:40.
The time now, well, here in the UK is 8:28. So we're having I guess a mini break, or, you know, step away, get some tea, or just review these questions so we can discuss in 5 minutes, let's say at 33. Is that okay?
33, yeah. And maybe if you can come back with an example, not everybody has to, in English or another language as well. How would you change this expression? It could be a saying, it could be like somebody told you, like something somebody told you even, you know, and how would change it in a way that is not just sexist or homophobic in a way, right? Changing the way we speak. Yeah, okay. So I guess see you in 5, right? And then we can go around again, and then 8:40 we move to race, which is a huge, of course, topic. We can't even begin. We can try.
I'll pause the recording for now if anybody wants to speak in this.
Okay.
To many different people, so I can't tell you who it was, but it was something about, I think it was particularly about women, but I think it can be true of anybody who is considered other in some way. You have to work twice as hard to be considered half as good.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's the sort of the hidden struggle of people, like Ali, you were saying, with the university professors. Like, if you had been #1 tip-top student, like maybe even 150% ahead of like every single other person, they would have had to pay attention to you.
Mm-hmm.
But you weren't. Like, you're not a super genius next level in the human evolutionary ladder. So, you know, you're a human being and a person. So it's, yeah, I think that's the hidden struggle, is to be that extra amount good just to be given a place at the table.
Mm. Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you for that, Sam.
Yeah, totally. I can tell you, is it Lottie? I'm sorry. That like for example, I always felt like my grandparents were always like thinking of me as a future doctor or whatever, and my female cousin, of course, had to work so much harder than me, right, to even be considered equally, right? She's a doctor now, by the way, medical doctor.
Which again, I think feeds into maybe the way people who are more privileged can just be more conscious of those around them. If you're sitting in a university classroom and there are people around you of different, you know, so there's somebody with, you know, somebody down the front in a wheelchair, there's people of all different races and ethnicities and backgrounds, and, you know, some might be looking a bit scruffy, some might be looking, you know, super rich. I think it's a good thing to think, well, I deserve to be here as much as anybody else, but also everybody else deserves to be here, because everybody has gone through a different level of struggle, even if it's on a privileged level, to be at that point. It's like it's seeing those boxes that people have had to place underneath them just to get to that same level.
Right.
Totally. Let's give it maybe another minute. That right, Karina? I don't have to. I don't know if it's a button, but I think, yeah, maybe we can give a minute to think of an expression in English or the language, right? And then. I don't know how we can go through the whole race issue in 20 minutes, but we'll try. But I think that it is useful that we're already thinking in terms of how they all relate to one another, right? And for you, Karina, I think, yeah, we can do it. I think that for you, I think something really interesting that you were mentioning earlier today was how you cannot even sometimes separate, right, discrimination based on race or gender, right, and it's always come together.
I don't know if you can see the chat, Ali, but Josie has submitted a sentence.
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Nice, totally. Yeah, that's already a good example. I guess you can see that in the chat, right? And we can just, I guess, roll back into it, right? From each according to their ability to each according to their need. Yeah, totally. Because there's a constant he, his, right? Reference in almost all expressions and sayings we use, right? From each according to his ability to each according to his need. Even on the left, right? You obviously, that's and from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. Yeah, that definitely is right. More inclusive. And if anybody, you can also write in the chat, I guess, right? Like that's completely possible. Or you can just unmute yourself if you haven't spoken before, or if you want to say something, please. Karina, you have a way that I don't know.
Hi, I've unmuted myself.
There you go.
Hi. Yeah, I don't know if this counts as a phrase, but I always think it's so interesting that the phrase, let's talk man to man, feels so different from let's talk woman to woman or let's talk person to person. Like it's so gendered, that language. And it blows my mind every time that the nuances of that are so different.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then telling somebody to grow up hair, totally. I cannot even begin talking about it about that in Italian. Lorenzo had to go, for example, but in Italian it's endless. You cannot be offensive to somebody without being sexist or homophobic. Literally, like there's so few ways to be offensive if you have to be or want to be without being homophobic or sexist in Italian. And if anybody else, if you had any.
I was gonna say, in like technology, which is traditionally like a male-dominated industry, like back in the, I don't know, 60s or 70s when it was developed, like cables usually are gendered. So like you have the male end and the female end, because you plug them in like that. So I don't know, maybe like changing the way that we view those connectors by changing their names could, I don't know, reduce the gender of it, I guess.
Totally, yeah, because the male is the one who penetrates and the female is penetrated. I remember my dad talking about this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God. Yeah, absolutely.
Just kind of really gross when you really think about it.
Yeah,
so.
In both, like politically, really, right? Politically gross for me as well. Totally. It's like, yeah. Anybody else? I think that Josie was writing as well in the chat.
Yeah, Josie, you made a comment. Do you want to?
Yeah, please go for it, Karina.
About that?
Oh, sure. I will talk about it. I think, and J.K. Rowling is a great example of sort of how do we treat the work now that it's problematic? And, I think, yes, citing historical works, like, what do we want to change? What do we want to acknowledge? And so I work with doctoral students, and so we spend a lot of time talking about these nuances and how to treat them. There's been some good work done on how to cite transgender work before someone transitioned and after, which is really handy. But how do you treat like male female couplers for electronics? I mean, that is changing an industry. So how do you go about that? And how do you look at older work where you're talking about, I don't know, schematics or something? So that's a lifetime of work probably for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, good point.
And I think that for me, like also, just one quick thing is that that some people are very resistant to like changing the way we speak, and they also some female friends of mine will say like it doesn't matter, to change the way we speak because inequality is still so real. And I think that of course it's true, right? Changing the way we speak and write, it's not everything, but I do think that it does change the way we think as well and the way we behave, and so everything does matter, I think. Although obviously material reality lags behind, right? It is not as fast in adapting to this kinds of change, but we have to begin somewhere, right?
Do you think that the resistance people have to changing the way they speak, the particular words they use, do you think that might stem from a sense of guilt? Because obviously, J.K. Rowling said what she said about women and transgender women. And so then the cancel culture started coming up and going, oh, you don't read her books, boycott the movies and all this, that and the other, which is a whole other topic of conversation. But I feel like maybe, to agree or disagree with someone on one point, I feel like these days you have to jump into one boat or the other. You can't just say, well, yeah, I disagree with what she said here, but I still love the books. I grew up with it. I love the movies, etc. And so I think there's a guilt of going, if I love the books, I must also agree with this part. Maybe there's something in that.
Yeah.
Karina, did you want to respond? No, can add something if you want.
Yeah, no, it is a really fine line. It's really difficult to kind of, I guess it kind of reminds me of music as well, whether it be R. Kelly or Michael Jackson. Can we appreciate that music? How do we differentiate and separate and enjoy on one hand and condemn on the other? I think that's a really good point. That is really, really hard. And the cancel culture that we have now, this extremism kind of that we see in social media, it doesn't allow people to, at the moment, it's not allowing people to perhaps learn or give them time and space to learn. So that's what's dangerous about it. And judging people on one, just not giving people space and time to kind of re-educate themselves and to, come back again. Hopefully that is going to happen, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say also, talking also like transitioning into the race conversation as well, right? And maybe people who haven't spoken want to speak now, maybe they can intervene later by bringing it all together, right? I just feel like for somebody with a lot of white privilege like me, right? And like you grew up in a place like Trieste, which used to be Yugoslavia and Austria, and now Italy. The kid who looked most different from me in my classroom growing up was from Albania, right? and then I was like, you know, like shot over to San Francisco, California, and I was like, okay, how do I even begin to change the way I think, right? Because it's so much like denial also about the racism we grew up with. I grew up super racist, like of course all those ideas were in my head, and some of them are still are, right? But I've been trying to listen to my friends who are not, I don't like to say actually are not white, like who don't have a lot of white privilege, right? And like, and we can talk about it in a minute, but how do we work on ourselves if we are completely shut off right away? And right now in Berlin, I'm talking to a lot of friends and more, and like a lot of people coming around. It is completely possible, and I think also the intersectionality of our identities also helps, because you know there's nobody who's gonna be like, you know, maybe Trump, who's like gonna be like white, male, rich, able-bodied, and straight, and all that, right? We can all understand struggles and privileges at the same time. That's sort of like, I guess, maybe the main point of today. And how do we relate to one another in solidarity, you know, align with their struggles? And I guess like the race question, of course, is a huge one. And maybe I can just like start just sharing, Karina, the quick story about Jamaica. And like, it's actually a conversation I had with a group of girlfriends in Berlin last Christmas. And sorry, and it was about like a white Italian friend, okay, who went to Jamaica on holiday, and she was sharing with us how a lot of people had been racist, quote unquote, with her, right? And a lot of black local people had been racist with her, against her, and I started saying, okay, I appreciate that you probably didn't have the best time, didn't feel very welcome, but they were not being racist against you, right? The word racism means something very specific, and being racist means something very specific. It's not quite the same thing. And it is also, this is one way we should be really careful with words, because in that sense, we are really putting on the same plate the experience of, like, for example, a black woman in Italy and a white woman in Jamaica. It's not quite the same. The discrimination that people face is not quite the same. I feel discriminated in England. Obviously, I will never compare myself to somebody who goes from Pakistan to England looking dark skinned, right? So the racism question comes from a very specific historical context. And I think that's really, this, by the way, is the first minister of the Italian Republic was black. And she was insulted, thrown bananas at, okay? And she was a minister of the Republic. Imagine in daily life, how can Italian white woman or white man or whatever say that, you know, she was experiencing racism in Jamaica? Of course, it's a matter of ignorance as well, right? We just use the word racism, we overuse it, we abuse it, but it comes from a very specific context. And like, I just wanted to just mention that. Who invented whiteness, right? Whiteness doesn't really exist, right? I took the train once, Trans-Siberian train from Vladivostok to Moscow across all of Asia. In Vladivostok, most people looked Asian to like a white American European gaze, right? Next to Korea. You get to Moscow, most people look white. In the middle, there was no border. There's no border where Europe started, right? And whiteness is really an artificial invention. And racism was a theory invented by white European colonizers, right? During colonialism. I bring back the pictures of like, aside from Elon Musk, of like colonialism in Africa, Chinese workers in the US, right? It was a theory, the theory that people could be split in different races, right? Of course, we are one species, one race, the human race and human species actually. And so it was a complete invention to justify colonialism, right? And I just wanted to bring in these three things, because we often say you can only punch up, right? You can always like ironically joke, like for example, I'm in Germany right now. I have an Italian accent when I speak German. Of course, I can make fun of the German language, not in a way that German people could not make fun of me having an Italian accent in German. This is a tiny difference between Germany and Italy. Imagine between Norway and India, right? There's like always power involved. And these structures have been decided centuries ago. We cannot just like pretend that they're not there. This was the one in colonial Latin America, right? On top you have Peninsulares, people born in Spain, white, Spanish, Creoles, people of European descent born in the colonies. The trigger warning here, if you feel like it's a lot for you, of course you don't have to look at all this or the next two. mestizos, people of mixed Native American and European descent, mulattoes, people of mixed African and European descent, and on the bottom of the hierarchy, Native Americans and people of African descent. This hierarchy was in place and still is in many ways in our heads. We're all racist. That's the thing, we all have it in our head. And there's colorism in the Black community. There's of course all sorts of different stuff we have in our head and that we need to deconstruct. The next one is Hong Kong. The University of Hong Kong commissioned this. Top you have Chinese, then you have Caucasian, of course, right next to the Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Indonesian, Malaysian, Filipino, Thai, Vietnamese, Cambodian, African, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Nepali, Arabian. This is the hierarchy that is very common in Hong Kong context. And the American one has been globalized by Hollywood, obviously, so it is the one we're all confronted with, I think. In the UK especially, it's becoming so influenced by the US more and more. You have this includes wealthy WASP people, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, right? Middle class WASP, so you have class involved in that. Poor WASP, inside it you can see gender as well, obviously. General whites, old European immigrants, last great migration into Europe of Southern Eastern European people, Italian and Irish, honorary whites, quote unquote, middle class East Asians and other that look white or look more pale. Then you have mixed white, fair-skinned, half white people, mulatto, mestizo, non-white people of color, Hispanic, Indian, Native American, and other Asians, and then African Americans, Afro-Latino, anyone perceived to be Black. And all this is being completely invented, right? It's being completely invented, which is not to say it doesn't have consequences in our life. And how do we undo this? We undo it in our head, and we undo it by changing the way we speak, obviously, and think and behave, I think. So, you know, there's a lot of race-based inequalities, even though race doesn't exist. Privileges and struggles, whiteness versus being a person of color. And then the whole question of actually talking about people of color from a white perspective, putting them all together in one big category, right? POC, people of color, could actually be more precise and POC, sorry, this is a P, forefront experience of Black and Indigenous people in the US context, and then BILAM, Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, Middle Eastern people, BAME in England, Black, Asian, Middle Eastern, right? And then I don't know how different people feel about it, but of course, I feel like in general, I try to listen to people of color, or no white people, within Black, Latinx, Asian, Indigenous, Middle Eastern, so that I actually change the way I behave and think. And maybe Karina, you can comment about this, right? And then we can open it up a little bit. I don't know if there's time for the breakout rooms, but we can try. How do we change the way we think, right?
Sorry, I was speaking and I hadn't unmuted myself. Yeah, Sam has made an interesting point regarding colorism, which is kind of within racism, where people darker skin are perceived to be less, I guess, attractive or nice as those with lighter skin. And I totally get it, because I'm a lighter shade of brown, and I'm sure I'm perceived, yeah, to be, I don't know, more approachable, friendly, or, you know, crazy things like that. So yeah, it's important to think about that. Going back to your white Jamaica story, yeah, I'm thinking about power and where the power lies, who has the power and influence, and that people in power need to be aware of their own privilege and aware of kind of lack of knowledge, gaps in knowledge when making decisions, kind of important decisions for big groups of people. And in that sense, I'm like talking about the government and or the British government here, and thinking about these acronyms. It reminds me of an interview by Sky News with Matt Hancock, important guy in our government. And basically the news reporter was asking, you know, thinking about diversity, like, are there any Black people in, you know, among your peers in the cabinet? And he pointed out a couple of British Asians. which was like really sad because, okay, you weren't able to answer the question and you've just put kind of brown people all in one group and said, okay, more or less, we've got that covered. Then he went on to say that, when the news, reporter said, okay, that's not, they're not black, basically. He said, but that's okay because we have diversity of thought. And my mouth kind of dropped. I'm still in shock by what he said, because obviously the cabinet is predominantly white, male, straight. So I'm kind of flabbergasted that this is kind of seen as diverse and scared. And just one other comment, because I don't want to speak too long. BAME, you put Middle Eastern, I think they refer to it as minority ethnic. Regardless, I have to say that I think
I was influenced by the US in there as well.
Yeah, it's okay. I essentially don't know this word. I did go and live in China for 6 years and I came back and this thing was here. I'd never seen it before. I had to go and look it up because I thought, oh, I think this refers to me. And I don't know. I must have missed it. And again, it kind of speaks to kind of lumping people all into just like one kind of one group in my opinion. I don't like it. I think it's, people are kind of divided in where they are. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking now.
And minority ethnic is actually even more general, right? So it does go back to people of color. I think.
Yeah, I wanted to say something on that actually, because
can I just introduce the questions before you do so that sure. you can think about that as well. Just a question of like, again, thinking of one struggle and one privilege in your head or share it or whatever, and then just if you want also to think back of how this changes your awareness of struggles and privileges in your way of teaching and writing. Sorry, didn't want to cut you off.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I just wanted to pick up on that acronym. Sorry, I don't know what it's called, of BAME, because it is something that they invented recently, and it's really problematic because that ME standing for minority ethnic means that it becomes very elastic. So you can put any ethnic group in there, including Romanis, Irish travellers, and what it does is it maintains white supremacy. It maintains whiteness as the default setting and otherness as this group which we don't even really need to describe accurately. And part of the reason why they've done that is because reasons of data management. And there's a big internal conversation happening in the UK at the moment about the census, about the next census, because the default setting is to have white as the first category, but all the other categories run in alphabetical order. So white should be at the bottom, and they can't decide whether or not to change it. And I find that extraordinary that that's even a conversation that we're having.
I didn't know that, so that's really interesting. Thank you.
I'm just thinking as well about the BAME in the UK. That's what I can reference because I'm in the UK. I'm not too sure about the others, but it's being used a lot recently because of COVID-19 and how people of colour and people from certain national backgrounds, like families of immigrants or, second generation, are disproportionately affected by COVID in that they are more likely to die of it. I don't know, I think they're probably more likely to get it, but they're certainly more likely to die of it. And I think in one way that it's useful to, from a data point of view in this context, it's useful to put people into certain boxes because there are certain traits that go along with those particular aspects of somebody's circumstances that can be helpful to explore or expect other things to come along with them. For example, when I was pregnant, somebody said, one of the questions I was asked was, do you have any African people of African descent in your bloodline, because that could open you up to sickle cell disease because it's more prevalent in Africa, etc. So it's like, okay, so because that was medically relevant. So I think in this case, it's trying to do that, but I think it is misguided because you do, again, you get people from the Romani communities all lumped in together when they wouldn't lump each other. They wouldn't all get in, in the same boat together. They wouldn't ever put themselves in the same box. But because they're not white, that's the box they get put into.
Can I just add something about that, Karina? Because I think there was a podcast that we listened to as well. That was, I apologize because my presentation is of course very US centric, absolutely. And the question in that podcast was really by a group of radio broadcasters and activists in the US, right? They were talking about the term POC. The question is that I think that's a very important question because of course, it is like putting all people are not white in the same category. Some of those people were also saying that actually that gives them a sense of solidarity in aligning each other because they're actually facing discrimination in a way that white people don't, right? And I think therefore there's on one side, we of course, and by we I mean people with a lot of white privilege like myself should not lump all people who are not white in the same category. On the other hand, it should be acknowledged that we're not all the same in that sense, right? That's the whole question over there, in the sense that we cannot pretend that being non-white, not being white, not having white privilege, puts you in the same position of power in society. And even but the question is that also within, the big group of whatever POC means, there's a lot of inequalities there as well. But I still think that it can be useful to actually talk about, as those activists were saying, to talk about not being white because of lack of privilege in that sense. And so finding solidarity and alliance against discrimination by many white people.
I'd be interested to know, those of you who've lived in Asia, for example, when you have to fill in a form, does it have the same kind of questions? Because for me, it seems to take away people's right to self-determine their identity and whether or not they choose to identify on ethnic or racial lines. And what about, in the UK, after several generations of immigration from all different parts of the world, like some people just don't fit into a category. You can have 4 grandparents from 4 different continents.
Yeah, I'm just trying to remember when I can't remember what I filled out when I applied to go and work in China. I just know that passports from certain countries are highly favored and all the rest are not. I'm talking about the UK, America, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, Ireland, and I think that's about it. So that's kind of privilege. That's another kind of perspective of privilege there, operating in Asia.
I find that quite interesting as well. I have some friends of, so for example, a friend from South Africa comes from an Italian background, and I think she has dual nationality. But I think for many people that with dual nationality, sometimes they choose one over the other to have that golden passport that is British or American or whatever it is, because then they don't get the funny looks at border control or whatever,
Right, absolutely. And Karina, I don't know if any also other people had any last comments also on back to your position as teachers or writers, right? Thinking of all 3 together, class, race, gender, and all all these issues, right? And how our power or struggles influence our role, maybe.
Yeah, do you have the question for us to have a look at on the screen?
Yeah, it was back to the initial one.
Well, for me, I work in ELT as well. I'm an editor, hoping to get into writing as well. And there's lots of, there's considerations, particularly when you're looking at, you know, you'll have a topic of jobs, and you have to decide to brief the illustrator on who to draw in each job role. And, you know, you have your radar pricks up and you go, oh, you have to make the doctor a woman, and you have to make, you know, the firefighter a woman, and you have to make the nurse a man, and, you know, and you have to mix it up like that. So I think it comes into play when I'm looking at a manuscript. I have to look at it through that filter as well.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Sorry, so I think I've got lots and lots of thoughts about this, but one in particular, I think when it comes to ELT, is the fact that vocabulary is graded. And so therefore, for a disabled person to be able to identify themselves, an A2 learner does not have access to the words that they need to describe themselves, because for a word like wheelchair is something like C2. So that's one of my personal hobby horses at the moment, that, you know, looking at recategorizing language so people actually have the vocabulary to describe themselves, even when it comes down to describing your hair or your skin color, which is one of the first things you learn as an ELT learner. You might not often, you know, the language that you're taught is a very white centered, and there isn't much diversity there. There's no opportunity for anyone who isn't non-disabled and European, perhaps, even to describe themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That makes me think about a resource that I wanted to mention, which I haven't bought and looked at yet, but looks very interesting, and you might have heard about it. It's called Raise Up. I think it's called Raise Up. And it's a suite of books at different CEFR levels, at different language levels, for English language learners, written by diverse authors about and including diverse topics. And so I'm now really curious to actually purchase a copy. I need to decide what level, and to check what you've spoken about, Lottie, and see what they have done there. That's really interesting.
I'm glad you said that, Lottie. I'd never even considered that. The language people need to just talk about themselves. The first thing, the first thing I learned in French class was, my name is, I am from, this is how old I am. It comes from yourself. And if you don't have that, it's definitely a failing.
I wonder if anyone who hasn't spoken would like to speak now, seeing as we are near the end. I don't want to call any names, only if you want to.
I think calling is not fair.
I just wanted to go back to that whole passport thing. I actually moved to China with my family almost 10 years ago. So when I was like 5 or 6 years old, and I don't know, I had an American passport, so it was very easy to get in. But then just like getting there and seeing like no other nationalities, you had to be like American, Korean, Japanese, and then like nothing else. Other than that, it was Chinese. So I don't know, that disconnect between like getting in and then just seeing no one else diverse was just kind of weird to me. And then also just being like the only white face in a crowd was kind of off-putting, but also an experience that I can really cherish.
Mm-hmm. You're talking about getting into China, the whole country?
Yeah, me and my family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, me and my family moved there when I was a kid, and I went to an international school, but like the international school only had a very like select few nationalities depending on who was able to get in. So
Or don't get me started about international schools and how
Oh my God.
neo-colonial they are, right? The British School of Cairo and the American University of like Shanghai. It is, we cannot get rid of this stuff like, you know, overnight. That's for sure. But I do think like the first step is being aware of them, right?
For sure.
Accepting they exist. Yeah. Also, Karina, I forgot to mention this, but I think as a teacher, this sort of like step up, step back question, right? I think is often used, and I think it's really useful. Instead of calling people, right, like which we try not to do, right, to step up, step back. And again, I felt uncomfortable because I was a speaker today, but I do try to step back often because, you know, it is. I'm more confident than my cousin as a woman, for example, right, because of my privilege. So I try to step back, and then that would allow her to step up more, right? So I think that in general, as teachers, we can definitely use this, talking about, you know, privilege and being like, hey, like kids or students or whatever, try to step up, step back, meaning try to step back if you normally feel like you listen to more, and step so that other people can feel more comfortable to step up.
That can be easier said than done.
Yes.
I remember when I was at university, it was this one guy, and I don't know if it was because he was a guy or just because it was just him, but whenever there was a woman talking, and obviously, you know, I'm not backwards and coming forwards, I'll speak my mind if I have something to say. He would interrupt the girls. He would never interrupt the guys, and he would always cut across them. So yes, it's a definite thing to encourage in a classroom, but yeah, it can be a struggle.
Yeah. If people are not aware of their privilege, I think it's impossible to step back. I think being aware of it is the first step.
And making people aware can feed back into that guilt again. So it's a little bit of a fine line to be drawn. You know, if you push it in their face and say, you need to step back because you're so lucky. Nobody goes through life thinking, oh, I'm so lucky. You know, they all just think about the struggles. Everyone's just focused on their struggles. So it can be hard to bring to somebody's attention.
Yes, that's why I felt with Karina, we're thinking about struggles and privileges, right? Because we often tend to think about our own struggles and other people's privileges. Oh, they're so lucky. What about our own privileges and other people's struggles, right? How do we balance that, right? I'm so happy we did this, Karina. I know that not everybody could speak. I don't know if, of course, there's any more comments. I can stay another few minutes. I just think it's really difficult, of course, to talk about all this together and for everybody to speak in the same way. But I think it is very useful as teachers and writers to think about these things. Yeah. Did you have any last comments, especially as teachers or writers? Like,
well, for the second question, struggles, identities, influence our creative writing. I mean, obviously, I'm trying to create a space for people to kind of, explore their identities, and one way to kind of process it is through writing. That's what I'm trying to encourage through this little project that I'm working on. Another resource that I wanted to mention, I don't know if you've got it on this PowerPoint or not, which would be useful for writers, was I think it's about writing about, I guess, people of color, and it's been written by writers of color, basically. I found this really cool link by different British and American authors, which I thought would be quite useful for the writers here. And maybe you don't have the link, but I will share the link to everyone later.
I think we can put together like an email and share resources, just also some links to some material or anything you wanted to share. Yeah, thank you folks so much. Yeah, I guess the last slide was just really my own answer to the question. If we're really on the same boat, I would just say not quite or not yet, but hopefully soon enough we will be. I think that's sort of like how I think about that question. Hopefully, right?
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karina. Yeah.
So thank you to my
Thank you, everybody.
mainly presenter, my co-presenter, Ale. And thank you for all of you guys for showing up, participating, contributing. It was an ambitious project to cover all of these topics and to try to think about them and to talk about them. And we only touched on the surface, but I think it's okay, and it's a good start.
For sure.
Thank you to everyone. Let's say our goodbyes.
Yes, we can stop the recording. Then I think somebody wanted to stay after for a couple of. Thank you,
Bye
everybody.
all. Thank you so much.
Bye. Have a good day.
Thank you to everybody, everyone.